So, Berto, a while ago at the live event, you said to me that you wanted to do an episode on Piaget, and also some other patrons have asked us to talk about it.
Yeah.
Why do you want to talk about Jean Piaget?
So my father was a child psychiatrist. And so growing up, he had many textbooks in his room, and several of them were Piaget. I even misremembered the other day thinking that On Death and Dying was one of them, but you corrected that. But I remember seeing all these books, and the name also was unusual because it's a French name, and so I didn't come across a lot of French names on a daily basis, and it just would stand out. And I remember asking him a lot of questions. Oh, what's that? What's that book about? And they were also about kids, right? Like they had pictures of kids and all these things. So I remember like, oh, what's this? And it seemed fun to me. Like, is this a fun thing? But I remember my dad talking quite a bit about it, and I got really interested in that. And then as I grew older and I got interested in my current profession, it turned out that Piaget there was a lot of relationship to that.
All right, well, let's talk about Jean Piaget today. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm also a professor in a marriage and family therapy program at Antioch University, Seattle. Who are you, Berto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I teach Romantic French.
So some caveats here is that I am not an expert on Piaget or developmental psychology or child development. It's something that as a therapist and as a professor, I can speak to with some authority, but there are people out there who know a lot more about this than I do. You know, there are certain topics, for example, psychotherapy topics. I can speak. I can't imagine going to a seminar and hearing another psychotherapist talk and have me go like, oh my God, that person is more of an expert than I am.
Right.
You know, I can't imagine. They might have other ideas,
but you've spent so much of your time on that.
Thinking, reading, doing, whereas child development there are plenty of people who know a lot. It's a very complex, deep topic.
Right.
And Piaget is almost kind of like the simplest sort of introduction into the field.
Right. That was like the start of the field in a way.
Right, which we'll get into. It's a highly technical field, lots of research, neurology, micro differences of the object permanence, by different tiny little stages, and it gets very complicated. So, and since I'm not an expert, I'm gonna make mistakes on the lingo and some of the details. So I apologize for that.
And it's getting hot, very hot, as it relates to my field of Romantic French.
Right. So personal life. Born in 1896 in a French-speaking region of Switzerland. So he's not French technically, or his mother is French, but his father was Swiss professor of medieval literature. And he's the oldest son, which might be a factor because he observed his younger siblings while he was growing up. Mm-hmm. At university, he became interested in psychoanalysis, and he moved to Paris and taught at a school for boys. That school was run by Alfred Binet, the developer of the Stanford Binet intelligence scales.
Right.
So very influential time of his life. Piaget administered and scored these tests himself, and he noticed that young children answered the test differently than older children did, and he wondered if there might be different cognitive stages development. This is when he started to wonder about that.
By the way, didn't he also learn under Carl Jung at some point?
I didn't come across that, but I wouldn't doubt it. Being a Swiss man around the same time. Okay. There weren't, back then there were so few psychoanalysts that it was probably likely that you would bump into people,
right,
1921, he returned to Switzerland as the director of an institute. 23, he got married. He had 3 children. And Piaget, for his whole children's lives, he studied his own kids.
Right.
1920s, he worked as a psychologist. He studied child development. He began testing children himself. He also became a professor, and he started to develop his ideas of early cognitive development, and he started developing his stages, which would be called genetic epistemology. From 1929 to 1968, he was the director of the International Bureau of Education. He thought education was very important. He said, only education is capable of saving our societies from possible collapse, whether violent or gradual.
Yep. I think that's probably very true.
Yeah. And this is at a time when compulsory child education was not
a thing.
It was not a thing, There were plenty of people that were being, pulled out of school early or didn't go to school at all. People saw him as a keen observer of children. He pointed out many things that had never been really described in science, although it should be said that probably parents have always seen these developmental stages in kids, but just didn't really,
Right.
codify them. His ideas were kind of ignored until the 60s and 70s, interestingly. He became kind of rediscovered in the 60s while he was still alive, because up until that point, behaviorism, Skinner, it really dominated the field of psychology and child development, but it failed to really describe the sort of things that Piaget was looking at.
Right.
And it also didn't consider a mind occurring and developing, because behaviorism is all about observation, and so they avoid anything having to do with like the development of a mind. Anyway, Piaget died in 1980. And in later on in life, Piaget was still being referenced a lot, and he's second only to Skinner as the most cited psychologist from his time.
It's funny you said Piaget died in 1980, and later on in life, he was still being acknowledged.
Weird statement, I said. He had a lot of ideas about education and children. He thought that children should seek solutions themselves and not be taught solutions. He thought that teachers should facilitate learning, not direct learning. He thought that children's level of thinking should be considered and not they shouldn't be like routed into a particular kind of activity. The child's sort of individual skills should be considered.
Yeah.
That teachers need to assess children over time in terms of their abilities and what they should be trying to help them with. Piaget also thought that children shouldn't be pushed too much, which is just so interesting because he noticed decades ago that American children were pushing their kids too much.
Right.
And it's like, if he was alive today,
he'd be horrified.
My God, He also thought that the classroom should be a place of discovery and experimentation.
Yeah.
And I have to say that when I was a kid, there were pockets of very Piagetian education that I was in. Like there were classrooms that I'm thinking were at least influenced by him.
Wow.
Where we would have little like stations, like we had a computer and then where you could plant and grow things.
Was it a Montessori environment?
No, not officially.
Okay.
But there were, and then the next year I'd be in a totally normal, like didactic sit in rows kind of class.
I wonder if it mattered based on who your teacher was or something?
Yeah, there were also these different programs. Like one program was called TLC, which was the learning community that I was involved in, that my parents signed me up for, which is a bit of a blessing and a curse, really.
This is all because you were super slow.
Yeah. Actually, so just to point out something about that was that the first TLC class that I took was in the 5th grade. And up until that point, I considered myself to be average or even below average student.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I think average at least, or somewhere around there, mostly because I've always been a really slow reader and my verbal skills compared to other skills it's not as good.
I see. So you thought just kind of hard to learn things or something.
Well, I just compared myself to 3rd, 2nd grade to, it's just like, I'm pretty much normal. There's nothing, I'm not above average. And I guess I hope I just fit in well,
Yeah.
But in the 5th grade, we were in this TLC class and it was go at your own pace. Uh-huh. So you could go fast through the curriculum or you could go slow.
Oh, wow.
And
with any part of the curriculum or?
Yeah, everything. So like there were certain things that the teachers would teach, but the activities and the book exercises and everything, you just did at your own pace. And I finished the entire curriculum like well before the end of the.
Wow.
And I wasn't even working hard, I remember.
Right.
And I remember being like, maybe I'm smart, you know? and for the first time I thought, am I smart? You know, because math was also starting to get more emphasized, and I was always way better at math than reading.
Right.
And so anyway.
I had a very similar experience actually, because I think I might have said this before. When I started first grade in New York City, and I went to all of first grade in
New York City,
land of pretty. I was in Queens in PS 69. If anyone knows that school, that's where I went. I was in first grade, and it was hard as far as I remember, because first of all, I had a crush on this girl named Nicole, who didn't know I was alive. I called her Nickel, because I didn't know how to pronounce it. So Nickel. And there was this guy in third grade who I remember bullied me, pushed me down the stairs one time, stuff like that.
Oh my God.
And as far as school, I was just trying to keep up, right? Then second grade started, and then I think I got in, maybe not even halfway, but maybe it was halfway. And then I moved back to Colombia, and I started in second grade in Bogota. Second grade in Bogota was like probably third or even fourth grade in New York City. So I was lost.
Wow.
And so they had to move me back down to first grade. And even in first grade, I was struggling with the math.
Why would Columbia be so much harder for kids?
Well, these were private schools, but I don't know. And also they have one less year. Like they graduate at 11th grade. Oh. And yet they graduate with mandatory physics, mandatory chemistry, mandatory calculus, mandatory all these things. Wow. Anyways, whatever the case may be, I was so struggling. I got moved back down to first grade. I was still struggling. When I got back to second grade, I was so bad at the math, they had to give me a tutor.
Wow.
I was, so as far as I knew, then I got to third grade, and I was getting in trouble that I've told some of these stories, and I was like, I didn't feel like I was good at anything in school. I got to fourth grade and we were doing long division, and I was like, oh my God, this is so hard. And then everything else was memorizing factoids and things, and we had Bible class, and got to fifth grade. And what started happening, so this is funny that you're saying fifth grade. I started doing more learning at home on other topics. Like I really loved science, and my dad had all these magazines that were like Scientific American and Discover and others and things. And I would start reading articles.
Your dad had a subscription to Scientific American?
And Science too.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I started really kind of getting into that. Then by the time sixth grade hit, I started getting into math at home, and I started reading advanced out like books that were not even books we would cover at school. And that's when I started getting like both geeky and really into certain aspects of math and science and all these things. And then what also started happening is I actually was really good at, if I listened to the lecture, I could ace the test, right? And then I was pretty good at cramming. So right around then, I started actually being really good at cramming for things, passing tests, but terrible at long-term projects. So I learned one good lesson and one bad one. The good one was, okay, I guess I'm not so terrible at this educational stuff as long as I apply it to things I care about. And then the bad one was, and I can pretty much cram for anything and be okay.
You're still kind of that way, aren't you?
Well, but I... Yes, but compared to
but
what happened?
But like one of the things, I mean, just one domain of your life is music.
Sure. Yes.
Like you're an amazing musician, songwriter, and in the moment you can really get something done.
Yeah. Right.
But
the pressure's on.
But right, like we got a gig tonight. Like you back when we were in a band together, you would get all the gear, just like all the stage lights and everything.
I'm good at deadlines for sure. Yeah.
But to actually record one of your own albums, which is a long-term activity, your piano album you've been working on for 8 years now. And I'm still waiting for it.
Right. That I actually attribute.
Literally 8 years and a lot of money. Which we won't name.
We will no-go, yes.
Whatever number you have out there in your mind, listeners, times that by probably 10 or 20.
So that is actually the lingering damage that I suffered from not getting those tools early enough in life.
Well, related to Piaget, like what could we say would have made the difference? Like education-wise?
I'll tell you what it is. I was, take math, for example. At home, my dad was so excited that I got into math. But there were a couple things. One is my dad himself was not good at math. So whenever I would get stuck, he couldn't help get me unstuck. Not only because he couldn't help me literally, but he also didn't seem to realize that there were other avenues for him to help me get unstuck, like maybe connect me with one of the teachers from the school, or maybe find someone else in the family or another friend or something. That didn't happen. And so
we just sort of give up. You're like, I don't know.
Like, yeah, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what that is, right? That was the one thing. The second thing is, him and I had this thing that I actually loved doing, but ended up contributing to the problem. Friday night would roll around, and we'd have these great things where, like, we'd turn on music, he would be reading a book, and I would start doing some deep activity. Maybe it was building Legos, but maybe it was programming, maybe it was doing math, things like that. And I was allowed to sort of stay up indefinitely working on these projects. And if I wanted to obsess over it over the weekend, I could. But I never got the tool or the structure of, hey, it's okay to put it down, go to sleep, tomorrow we'll continue. And then the thing of the following week going, hey, let's take that project back up where we left it off. That never happened.
Well, and a little zooming out, your dad, if you want to talk about this,
sure,
probably, or tell me, also has a problem with long-term planning, right?
Yes, definitely. And yet,
it's like a pretty bad case of it.
Yeah, but so what's interesting about it is clearly my dad had the capability of getting all the way through all the education he had to get a child psychiatry degree,
which involves potentially a lot of cramming.
It might be or constant work. So maybe there's not even a chance to not do work because you're always doing work or something.
Yeah.
But either way, he's actually fairly methodical when it comes to studying. Like, he would grab a book, he would grab a highlighter, he would highlight all the things he didn't understand. He would go research them. Then he would put all these little notes, and then he would like lay siege to the book. I never did that, right? I was like, read, and if I didn't understand something, I'd reread it, and then that was it. I would never take notes. I would never do anything. My dad had this very methodical thing about that. But you're right. Long-term planning, like what is the outcome we want in 10 years, let alone, or 1 year, let alone 5 years, let alone 10 years.
Right.
That didn't seem to have, there wasn't that.
Yeah.
And so I personally never saw that firsthand, nor was I given those tools. And maybe there's some genetic aspects too, I don't know. But whatever the case may be, that is the biggest struggle that I had as a child, and definitely transferred into adulthood. Well,
Piaget has something to say about that, so let's get into that. Do you know how many stages he had, Berto?
4.
4 stages. So I will say in terms of context, in terms of the overall child development field, his 4 stages are just a small, tiny little part. In fact, I would imagine that some child development specialists don't even remember Piaget from their undergraduate studies.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? So that's why. Plus, Piaget only focused on a particular area of child development. Sure. He didn't go into morality or neuro, obviously, because they didn't know much about that back then. Socialization, culture, memory, right, attention, sexuality, language, general intelligence, achievement, emotional intelligence, identity, personality, etc. So it's a very specific slice of a look at certain elements and domains of child development.
Yeah, and to play a little bit of Piaget advocate, I think he might argue that, although that he probably would say like, yeah, well, I definitely focused on what I focused on, but I think he might argue that he saw the conclusions of what those stages meant as being impacting almost everything else about the child.
Certainly, yeah. You could go for that. So stage 1, sensory motor stage. This is from birth to age 2. This is when infants gain knowledge about the world through their physical interactions with the world. And all you have to do is see an infant to know that. There's, you put the kid, the 6 month down, they're sitting up, maybe they're crawling a little bit. They like to grab things, put it in their mouth. They like to rattle things. They like to roll around on things. They like to put things in their face. It's just about
they like to put fingers in sockets.
Yeah. It's just about like things that they can grab or things that will go at their face and things that they can feel and sense. So the senses in terms of hearing and sight and touch and smell, and also your motor abilities develop really quickly. Because you think about a newborn, they have no idea what they're sensing. They're sensing the entire world, but have no idea how to differentiate anything. Right. And over time, this, it's like, oh, that's what that feels like, and and then the ability to reach out, and the ability to crawl, the ability to very quick development in that area.
They have some built-in programs that they're not even aware that they have, and those let them start building new little programs. And they know that they don't know, but they have the program of crying when they feel certain feelings. And they have, like you're saying, they have the program of gripping or, closing certain muscles when they feel certain things on their skin of their palm. And
and the programming of pay attention to your parents' faces. And look to them for comfort and for cues about how to feel. Now, this stage, again, from 0 to 2 years is delineated into 6 substages. So we have 0 to 1 month is simple reflexes. So infants use reflexes such as sucking. It's mostly considered a reflex, not something that they decide to do. It's not like a later infant where it's like, I'm going to decide to reach out and grab the cat. Do you know what I mean? That's not a reflex. That's a choice that the infant is making. But early on, it's just simple reflexes.
Which makes sense because that's how they get the milk.
Right. That's all they need to do at that point. The second substage is 1 to 4 months, which is called first habits and primary circular reactions. Infants learn to coordinate with sensation. For example, when an infant accidentally sucks their thumb and they're like, oh, what was that? It's like the sucking of a thumb, again, isn't like, ooh, I bet you if I sucked my thumb, that would be an approximation for, suckling of the breast.
Right. It's more like an accidental variant of some motion they did. And they're like, oh.
Right. The arms, you just watch an infant, their arms are just kind of waving around, and then sometimes you'll see them accidentally hit themselves in their face. They'll be like bonk, and they'll be like, and you're just like, hey, you hit yourself. But they don't know, right? They don't even know their arms are attached to their body, really. They're just like, and then one random time their thumb goes in their mouth, and they're like, ooh, is this the nipple? And they're like, well, it's not a nipple, but it feels soothes me, and then by month 4, they can be like, when I do this with my arm and a thumb goes in my mouth, like it actually helps me out. Then they go into secondary circular reactions, which is 4 to 8 months. They become aware of objects outside their body, like a rattle or a cat or something. There's like this is me, and that is something else. Whereas prior to that, infants actually don't have any way of differentiating self from the outside world. It's just like everything is them.
We are all one.
They're
very zen at that stage.
Then they go into coordination of secondary circular reactions, 8 to 12 months. They really learn that they can affect the world, and they begin to use tools to get what they want.
Right.
So they can throw a block at something, or they can, I don't know, maybe use crayons if they're coordinated enough or something.
We should also point out that the older you get, the less well demarked these regions of time become. For example, when you're a fetus, it's like you can draw a chart pretty accurately of every stage of the fetal development.
Right.
And then you're born in the first week, usually most babies do the following, and then the second month, and then the third month. Then as you get closer to the year mark and then the 2-year mark and on, then babies start varying all over the place and kids start varying all over the place.
Right. I mean, in terms of variance, there are people who develop slower, faster based on different things. But another way of putting it mathematically is that when your stage is 0 to 1 month, then the variance percentage wise, if you go 50% off the mark, then you're at 1.5 months. Whereas when your stage is from 11 to 16, and you go 50% off, you're talking about like 4 years.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And like it's one of the things that they found as they studied this across the world was that, especially the latter stages, the less educated, the poorer areas, they had years difference sometimes with the stages.
Right. That's actually one of the critiques of Piaget, is that he was basically claiming this was a universal human stage thing when they actually, and he downplayed education and culture. Apparently one of the critiques is that culture, once they actually started to research it, which Piaget didn't have the luxury of being able to look at those studies, plays a large role.
To be fair though, like what he said was that the stages were universal, but the exact time frames varied.
Yeah, but I'm just saying true, but I'm just saying one of the critiques is that he didn't emphasize culture and society and education enough.
Which makes sense because, like you said, it'd be hard to study all that right off the bat.
Right, and everyone was like that back then. I mean, it was a common sort of misunderstanding.
I saw an interview of him when he was pretty advanced in age. He was probably in his 70s. Like, so before he died, obviously, but pretty advanced in age. And he was talking about this. So I think towards the latter part of his life, he started amending his perception of the brackets of time because of some of that criticism.
Yeah, I mean, just to talk a little bit about the history of psychology and stages, you were talking about on Death and Dying, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, her 5 stages of grief, and Piaget and his 4 stages of cognitive development. And you had Freud and his stages of psychosexual development. And those are just the famous ones. Or Maslow's stages of hierarchy, blah, blah. And there was this temptation, back in the in the later 1800s, early 1900s, to maybe even up till the 60s, the idea that in science, you reduced things to particular elements. For example, in physics, there was a time when we didn't understand atoms. We didn't understand atomic physics. We noticed certain qualities of like materials, but we didn't know why. And as we got to look, with smaller and smaller, we're like, oh, the fundamental, thing or element here in this material is this thing called the atom, a proton with neutrons and electrons. And then of course we went even further to quarks and other kinds of things. But the point is that the discovery process was to reduce nature to its smallest elements, and then from there you can understand the bigger picture. The only way to understand the macro is to understand the micro.
And categorizing was huge.
Right. Yeah. You need things to be like this and that, this species versus that species, and stars versus planets, and it was very discrete and was not that problematic in a lot of different areas. But when you actually look at humans, it's really hard to do that. But that was the effort, was like, we need stages, and we need to reduce it down to one particular thing that we can say is true about psychology, but which has become abundantly clear with all the efforts up until 2018, that reductionistic thinking does not help. There's nothing wrong with incorporating some of that into your scientific endeavor and your philosophy of trying to understand humans, but it really, really drives you in directions that makes you ignore the real thing that is happening, which is the macro. You have to look at the macro, and there really isn't a micro. There really isn't a small unit of psychology that everything emerges from. Right. But these stages were attempts at trying to do that, and it was very attractive. People really took to it and loved it. You know what I mean?
And one thing that's very useful, just like you could do it with medical stages. Like think if we thought of kids as fully grown adult bodies, and we treated them medically as such.
Right.
Think all the ridiculous things we'd run into, right? Well, similarly, imagine if we actually ignored that there are stages, even though they're gray and it's bell curves and not real straight lines or anything, but that there are stages of development. So if we were trying to teach a toddler things that they physically are not ready to understand, well, that is both a waste of time, potentially damaging all these other things.
Right.
Yeah.
Piaget's stages are some of the few stages that actually hold up.
Right.
There were countless other stages.
see, okay.
The 5 stages of grief, for example, are completely non-verifiable.
Okay, so you're saying that in general, there's tons of stage kind of work that doesn't actually hold up.
Yeah, like the stage of individual development in terms of like you get married at 22 and you have kids by 25 and you get you retire at this age. Like there were these life stages that people
Right.
try. It was just very attractive, and basically what it ended up just only doing is describing a particular culture, which doesn't obviously apply to other people. Anyway, let's take a break. When we get back, let's go on to the other stages, and maybe we can sprinkle in some examples from our own life
Yay.
that exhibit some of these transitions. I don't remember being 8 months old, so we haven't got. So what do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. If you haven't become a patron of the podcast yet, what are you doing with your life? I mean, come on.
Yeah, come on. What stage of development are you at?
Now's the time. Now's the time. And also, if you want to join the Facebook fan group, you can go there and interact with Berto and all the other patrons, along with famous patron Lyndon.
Yes.
Also, if you can review us on iTunes, that'd be cool. I always hear other podcasters saying, review us on iTunes. And so I just figure that must be, there must be a good reason
Definitely
for that.
review us.
Yeah. Also, like our Facebook group, our Facebook page. So we have a Facebook page and we have a Facebook fan group.
That's right.
If you like the Facebook page, you can play our Tuesday Tougher Bluff games, which generate a fair amount of interest.
Fun.
So, for instance, the last one that we did was Tougher Bluff, Berto. People who smoke marijuana have more sex on average. What do you think? Tougher Bluff.
I'm going to go Bluff because they're like, oh man, we should totally have sex. We should totally do sex. But then the other person's like, yeah. But should we get a bite to eat first? It's like, yeah, let's get a grubby grub. And so they go and they get a grubby grub and they get really full. And then they're like, do you still want to have sex? It's like, I don't feel so sexy anymore because I feel really full and I'm still hungry.
So I can tell you that Berto is wrong, but if you want to know the real answer, you have to go to our Facebook page.
Nice teaser.
All right, 8 to 12 months, coordination of secondary circular reactions. This is when they learn that they can affect the world and begin to use tools to get what they want. And they begin to understand object permanence, but it's sort of, there's different gradations to that.
Yeah.
There's a whole set of different stages to object permanence that infants and children will go through. But at about 8 to 12 months, infants start to realize that when they can't see something, that doesn't mean it has completely been annihilated.
Right.
You put a ball underneath a blanket, and the kid at this stage will begin to be able to say, "Oh, the ball is under the blanket. It's not
Right.
gone." Whereas to a 4 or 6 month old, you put the ball under the blanket and
Gone.
it's gone. and you'll see infants do that. You'll take something away from them temporarily, and if they can't see it, they will cry. They'll just be like, "It's gone," and then you just put it back in their field of view, even though they can't possess it, and they stop crying. They're like, "Oh, it's back,"
Yeah. And what's funny too is it's not even that it is, because obviously they don't have language, right? So one could argue that it could just have to do with accessibility to something, and that what makes them cry is lack of accessibility to something.
Yeah.
Whether or not some recess of their brain has data about the path that thing took or not becomes irrelevant, because they cannot access it as far as they're concerned, right? So it's not like in their brain they're going like, that object has disappeared, right? All that's happening is they're like, accessibility to object denied. Blah!
Well, I think they come at this from a lot of angles.
Sure.
And actually, again, without language, it's hard to know for sure. But I think they sufficiently demonstrate that children don't actually think it's been either eliminated or just.
I'm making just sort of a semantic useless argument, but I'm ultimately saying what's funny is we're using words to describe what the child is or is not understanding,
right.
but they don't have words.
Right.
So it's
and that's actually one of the critiques that I think is interesting is that a lot of times these studies, and we'll talk about them a little bit further, and you can actually, there's a fair amount of them on YouTube where actually amateurs are doing experiments on their children.
Yeah.
But and they're not harmful experiments. They're just,
electrodes on there.
Yeah.
Bursts.
And and sometimes a critique is coming up of just like, well, do they even know what you're asking them?
Yeah.
Is one of the critiques, because anyway, but the classic object permanence activity is what with an infant that you do?
Peekaboo.
Right. So when you cover your face with your hands, and then you remove the hands.
Yes.
The child believes you have just appeared out of nowhere. Right. They believe you have disappeared and appeared.
Right.
And you can get the exact same reaction from a baby if you actually leave the room and then run back in the room.
Right.
So it's not just the hands. It's like they love it's sort of an early version of humor. In fact, it might be like the very first funny thing that babies,
right.
Find to be funny is because they're so interested in you and your face.
Yeah.
That
you and I believe you and I got in a debate about this, but I don't know where you land on this now. But since you even said it, since humor is so much about surprise, that is a surprising result to them, right?
Right.
It's like, oh, world has been occluded.
Well,
there's Dada.
And it's also tragedy averted, right?
Right.
Is that the phrase?
Yeah, right.
So it's like, oh my God, Dada has been eliminated from the planet.
Right.
He's
I no longer have Dada.
He's gone.
Yes.
He has been completely erased from existence.
Oh, wait, no, never mind. Call off the...
He's back.
Yes.
Isn't that funny? Right. Like the first time Dada left, or the first 100 times Dada left, I was in distress. I thought he was just gone. He's never coming back. Because if I can't see it, it doesn't exist. Right. But maybe some things come back from existence that are eliminated. Dada has been eliminated. Is he coming back? Oh, he's back. Oh my God. How great is that? That tragedy, something tragic just happened and then it wasn't happening. Right. I'm laughing. This is great.
By the way, to belabor one idea. So, because one possibility is that the pleasure centers at that age are only getting triggered by photon detection. Like not photon detection, patterns of photons detected. So you're sitting there, and in fact, it is a fact that the photon information you're now receiving does not include the face of Dada, right? Your father is not in that picture. So it is true that since your only contact with the world at that point is through these senses, and one of the main sense at that point, like your eyes, well, maybe it's skin, but like one of the main senses at that point is in fact not receiving that sensory information, that your the rest of your little pleasure centers and everything are not getting fired. You're not getting that pleasure. You're not getting that safety and all these things. So in an actual real way, that has been eliminated from your world. Now, because we know we have all this other context, we're like, well, but in this grander sense, it hasn't been eliminated from your world. But to the baby's reality, it has been eliminated because the photons are not coming to my face. Right.
That's one way to look at it. And the last substage of the first stage of sensory motor stage is tertiary circular reactions, novelty and curiosity, which happens between 12 and 18 months. And they experiment with objects to see what they can do with them. So this is when infants will actually start to say, like, can I stack these? Mm-hmm. Can I throw them at sister? Can I eat them? Can I, like, what could I do with this thing? And then actually that's the second to last. And the last one is internalization of schemata, but we won't go into that one. Okay, so the second stage of Piaget is called the pre-operational stage. This is from 2 to 7 years, and it basically begins with being able to speak. And this is when children begin to understand the world symbolically. For example, a toy car represents a real car.
Right.
So obviously, this is when children can play and pretend.
Yeah.
They can, they can. When I was at this stage, I had Legos and would make things and would pretend with them.
Yeah.
And and it was a whole world I could live in. Did you do that, Lynn?
Oh, yes. I mean, I entertained myself most of the time because I was, an only child, effectively, for most of my childhood. So, yeah, absolutely. And my dad and most of the adults indulged such behaviors. So I had rich fantasy experiences.
Yeah, it was the same for me because I was kind of an only child because my older brother and sister were like 7 years older than me.
Yeah, right.
And were just ancient seeming to me.
Yeah.
And also were kind of like parents to me.
Yeah.
They didn't treat me like a sibling. They treated me more like they were one of their kids. And so I felt like an only kid. My parents had each other, my older brother and sister had each other, and then there was just me. And so, yeah, I had to entertain myself a lot. And the phrase that my family had when I was young was, Kirk's always in his own world, I would say.
Yeah.
So this is when children are able to form magical beliefs, such as Santa Claus and other kinds of things. I had a rich imaginary friend world for a while. I had 3 imaginary friends, Gigi, Jeff, and Jamie.
You mentioned that.
And we would talk a lot. I don't know why they all started with a J sound. And incidentally, I had never heard of the name Gigi or Jamie.
Really?
I think I had made those names up. I remember thinking that Gigi and Jamie had very weird names.
Okay.
And then later on in life, I was 10, I heard of someone named Gigi, and I was like, oh, because Gigi's not a common...
In fact, it's one of my songs.
Yeah. So, yeah, imaginary friends, and I also had stuffed animals that had extremely complicated lives with me, very...
Oh, that I had, for sure.
Yeah.
Because I mentioned I didn't have imaginary friends, but I had stuffies and toys that absolutely played huge personified roles in my life.
Right. So this also has to do with another element of this phase that Piaget recognized, which is animism, or objects having human minds, essentially.
Yep.
And children actually have a hard time conceiving that something that they have attached a human mind to wouldn't have a human mind. This doll is not alive.
Right.
And it does not care. And if you rip its head off and throw it into a shredder, nothing bad is happening. Right. Whereas someone at this phase would absolutely feel as though something bad. They wouldn't.
I never left that phase.
they wouldn't be able to kind of check in and go like, well, okay, I know it's not actually like a real thing.
So I don't I have this toy still, this little stuffed Winnie the Pooh. It was my little Winnie the Pusito. I've talked about him before. He was my little... I had a blankie, and I had Winnie the Pusito.
Right. Pusito, little poo.
Little poo.
Little shit.
I love that thing. And even to this day, I still have it. It's missing its little nose. It's wearing a Mickey Mouse shirt because I lost its original Winnie the Pooh shirt. But you know what? I could not even imagine harming that little thing.
Yeah,
I don't know if I left that stage.
I still have a stuffed animal dog named Sam, and it's in my nightstand. So anyway, but I listened to a podcast about Winnie the Pooh. They were trying to figure out how old Winnie the Pooh was. Oh. Because it's not clear.
Sure.
So how old was Winnie the Pooh to you?
Right. Well, to me, Winnie the Pooh was like an adult. But yeah, like an adult, but not like my dad's age. It was probably younger than my dad.
Okay. But like he doesn't wear pants, and he like isn't responsible,
All of the inhabitants of the 100 Acre Wood to me were older than me.
Interesting.
In my mind.
Yeah. Well, the podcast I listened to, they did a full analysis, and they landed on that he's a kid. He's like 5 or something.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Even though the voice actor in the cartoon is like an old man. Anyway.
That's interesting. Well, it makes sense based on the conclusions Winnie the Pooh reaches. Those are childlike conclusions.
Right. And, his buddy, the human, Robin, is his name?
Christopher Robin.
Christopher Robin. Isn't he often kind of like helping Winnie the Pooh out? Like,
and I always thought
poo.
of Christopher Robin as a much older child than
But Christopher Robin was like 8 or something.
Probably, yeah.
So by that definition, Winnie the Pooh's younger, right? Anyway,
Yeah.
so again, pre-operational stage, 2 to 7 years. Children are illogical at this time. They don't really understand how things work. For example, they don't understand concrete logic, and they can't mentally manipulate information. For example, at some point, so one of the experiments that they'll often use is they'll have 2 glasses with the same 2 identical glasses,
Right.
same amount of liquid in it, and then they take one of the glasses and they pour the liquid into a tall, thin glass. And so the tall, thin glass, it's sort of an optical illusion in that it looks like it has more.
It's taller. It's literally taller looking. The level of the water is taller.
Yeah, and it's so one would be tempted to believe it has more liquid,
Yeah.
and children at this stage will say it actually is more liquid.
And one of the interesting things that I saw was, by the way, one of the, I wouldn't call it criticism, because I was like, geez, how many people formed these insightful things at the time that he did, right? Like, clearly this is only applause-worthy work. But one of the things that get lost here is 2 to 7, there are so many other more changes that happen, right? That are not just, it's not just one stage, really, right? Like a 2-year-old is very different from a 3-year-old. It's very different from a 4-year-old. It's very different. Now, so what the reason I'm saying, one of the reasons I'm saying that is, I saw a thing where a 7-year-old, so right at the cusp, right? They were doing that experiment, and initially he says, the taller glass has more water, and so sort of confirming the experiment. But then when they probed around it, it seemed more like a semantics issue,
Right?
Because the child said, after some clarification, the child said, "Well, there is the same amount of water, but this one is bigger, or whatever." It's like something along those lines,
right? That's one of the criticisms that I actually have that other people have waged too, which is when you ask a child more, they might not semantically differentiate more from taller.
Right. Now, in his defense, he'd say like, "Yeah, I know, that's part of the problem. That's part of the thing."
Yeah.
Like, so you could.
But really, what these experiments are trying to measure is the ability to understand material volumes.
Yeah, conservation of thing.
Right, exactly. Now, I don't doubt that younger children are not as good as older children with that. So I don't think but in terms of exactly how do you tease that out experimentally and da-da-da. Children at this stage are also still egocentric, meaning that they have a hard time seeing things from other people's point of view, mentalization, this kind of thing. Empathy is challenging for them. The classic experiment is they'll have a mountain, and on one side of the mountain will be like a cat, and the other side of the mountain will be a dog. And so they put the kid on one side of the mountain and they say, "What do you see from your perspective?" And they're like, "Well, I see a mountain and I see a cat."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Okay, great. So now I want you to sit on the other side and I'll sit where you're sitting." And so you sit on the cat side, they sit on the dog side, and they say, "What do you see?" And the kid says, "Oh, I see a dog and a mountain." And they ask the kid, "What do you think I see?" And the kid will say, "You see a dog and a mountain," even though they should say, "Well, you don't see the dog because you can't, but you see the cat." And so, and again, how do you exactly ask the question so that they understand exactly what you're asking them? You know what I mean? It's hard to know.
Right. Because it's also, I even struggle with this. What am I talking about? No human in the history nor in the future can inhabit someone else's mind directly. Right? So let alone a child really have a concept of what someone else might be seeing.
Right.
But that's part of the point. It's like they don't have that concept.
Right. And then they slowly develop that.
Yeah.
They develop, it's something you learn, and it's something they see in typical children that develop at a particular time.
Yeah.
Another developmental experiment is to you put a ball in a cup and you put it upside down. You ask someone leaves the room, and then you put the ball in the other cup, put it upside down. You ask the person to come back in, and then the experimenter asks the kid, where do you think the person who
Right.
walked out and walked back in, and where do you think they think the ball is? And they'll point to
The
where
new one.
yeah, they'll point to where the ball is rather
Right.
than where they should point, which is,
Right.
and then at a certain stage around age 7, children are able to say, oh, well, he thinks it's still in that one because he actually didn't see us move it. And so it's just a cognitive ability that children just don't have. For me, the only example I could really think of in my life about this, because it's hard to remember the way your brain works at that stage. But I remember when I was 2 or 3 years old, maybe 4, there was this girl who lived next door. Her name was Becky. And we were friends. We were like good friends because she was a neighbor girl, lived right next door, played all the time. And I remember this one sunny summer day, and I saw her. We were very close to each other, standing very close to each other. And I remember seeing her cheek, and I just wanted to bite it. In my head, it just looked like something that would be fun to bite, you know, because she had these big kind of kid cheeks, you know. And so I just grabbed her head and just bit her cheek as hard as I could.
Me too. Oh my God.
and she started to wail.
Of course.
Right? She's crying. And I remember looking at her like, well, that's confusing. Like, why does that hurt? You
Wait,
know?
how old were you?
Like 3 or 4.
Oh my God.
And I just remember being kind of confused, kind of by my impulse as well. Like, why did I want to do that?
Right.
And so I thought, well, this isn't probably a good scene, so I'm going to go home. So I just started walking home. And by the time I got home, she had gone inside and said something to her mom, and her mom had called my mom on the phone. And by the time I walked in the door, I was in trouble. But I remember just having no kind of concept of like the whole scene.
Right.
I was like, well, but I wanted to do it. So
What's the problem we're having here?
right. So it's an inability. Now it's hard to know like what was going through my head at the time, but it's possible that that's an example of me. Again, in my head, it's very egocentric. It's like,
Right.
well, I wanted to do it, and it didn't hurt me.
Right.
So why was she screaming? You know what I mean?
Yeah. What's your problem, lady?
Right. It's basically just psychopathic, right? This the complete inability to empathize,
Right.
which children have.
Right.
Anyway, another idea during this phase 2 to 7 is called centration. This is when you focus on one aspect of a particular thing at a time. The example I have in my life, I was like 6 or 7, and I was running in track because my older brother and sister were in track, and so it was like, well, maybe I should join track so that I'm not home alone. And we, one of the things that we would run, and when you're that small, like running around the track, the quarter mile is like 2 miles long. It just takes forever for kids to run that track when you're that old. And so the story goes, I don't remember this, but the way my sister tells me is, all the crowds would be on one side of the field. And so they'd go, and then I'd run and I'd, be running hard. I wasn't very fast, but I'd run hard. And then I'd get to the other side of the track, and I was the youngest kid on the track team. All the other kids were older. They sort of made an exception to let a super young kid on track because my brother and sister. All the other kids would consistently run hard the entire track.
You were like Harry Potter. They let you on the team even though you were the youngest.
Yeah. I get to the other side of the track, and I just slow down to like a walk.
Oh.
Because I am ages away from anyone watching me. And so I'm like in the weeds now, and I'm just like, well, I'm just gonna, who cares, And then I would come around the last turn, and then my sister would get everyone kind of cheering for me, like, go, Kirk. and then I'd be like, oh,
Okay, now I got to run.
And then I would run really fast. Like every time,
That's hilarious. So you're like, oh, it's pointless to run right here because no one's cheering me on.
Well, not that so much of like, what was I doing again?
Oh, I see.
Like I don't really care, unless someone is yelling at me. Like I don't remember why I'm doing
You
this.
forget the point of the.
Yeah,
How old were you there again?
like 6 or 7.
6 yeah.
Yeah. Like all you got to do is watch the one of the common things in suburban America that a lot of parents will subject kids to is to play t-ball, right?
Yeah.
It's like early baseball, right? And you watch these kids, and unless you are right there cheering them on what to do, they have no idea why they're doing it.
Right.
You know, they're just like, why am I swinging at this? Okay, swing it. Okay. And then, you know, you randomly hit the ball and then everyone's like, run. And you're like, what? You know, you have no idea, like, why am I running? You know? Okay, stop at the base. And you're like, okay. And then everyone's cheering and you're like, yay, I did something good. But you have no clue why. You know what I mean? You're just like, anyway, so
that's pretty fun.
So I think that's again, that's an overall inability to use logic to understand the greater reason for everything, you know, and to understand rules of baseball. Baseball in particular is complicated. You know what I mean?
You know what's one thing that's interesting is I have a lot of memories of 5 because I was in New York with my dad, and it's just I have a lot of memories of right around 5 years old. But in my memories, I feel sort of like I feel right now. Meaning, it's hard for me to imagine that line of thinking that's so little.
Right.
Because I see the scenes playing out in my head. Yeah. And I see myself as like, I was a little guy, right?
I was prepping for this episode. I did the exact same experience where I was like, in my head, I'm like, well, I wasn't like these people because I had logic, right? But it's like, of course I didn't, right? You know, like one example. So from this time is like an inability to hold a bunch of sequences in your mind, like like you can focus on one thing at a time. You don't have the ability to hold like 5 steps, right? And so I remember at the age of 4, I finally was able to tie my shoes, but by myself. Okay. And I remember trying to learn how to tie my shoes earlier, and it just seeming completely out of my league. You know what I mean? Right. Because like there's 4 or 5 steps involved. Right. And at the age of 4, I remember sitting on the steps at my parents' house. They still live there, and I think my sister and my mom like helping. You know, they're like, "This is what you do," and I was like, "Okay." And then I tried it, and they're like, "No, do it like this." And then I did it on my own, and I was like, "Holy crap!" I just tied my own shoes, and like. How that was a stretch for me. You know, it was like really mentally taxing to get those steps down. And you'll see kids do this when they're tying shoes. Right. You know, they get down on the ground.
They're really hyper focused.
Yeah, super focused. They're like, okay, grab this, make the loop.
It's like me tying a tie now.
Yeah. So you know it. Whereas, and again, it's sort of different because as adults we've done it so many times. It's habitual, but. It's a similar kind of thing. It's there's so many steps.
Well, actually, to be fair, if you watch an adult trying to learn how to play the piano, for example, like it feels that way. But I will say the even if you divorce it from the physical challenges, because clearly tying a shoe is a physical challenge.
Yeah, articulate.
Yeah, like if your mom or dad say. Go do this, then this, then this, then this. Forget about it.
Right. Yeah. I want you to this week.
Yes.
I want you to vacuum the house.
No, you lost me at this week.
Right.
Oh, by the way, I have this memory to see how funny it is that we put our adult selves in these memories of a kid. So I have memories of being around 3 years old and being very annoyed of getting dressed because I remember my grandma dressing me. So like between 3 and 4, I remember my grandma dressing me, and I remember feeling annoyed that I'm getting dressed up, right? But in my mind, I'm picturing me right now, like my personality, being annoyed that someone is dressing me.
I mean, emotionally, it might be very similar.
Right.
But in terms of your cognitive abilities.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's just hilarious because, I'm such a different little being.
Yeah.
But the memories stick all the way through. It's almost like this connective tissue. That's the thing that gives me that sense of permanence.
Right.
And I'm like, so I imagine myself, my personality of right now, feeling annoyed that my grandma's trying to dress me.
Yeah. I mean, all you got to do is think about the inane homework or classwork that you do in like, first or second grade to know that your brain worked differently back then.
Totally.
Because you were challenged by things, you liked doing things that you would never like doing as an adult.
And yet I have, right, like I'm picturing right now me in first grade doing addition, and in my head it feels hard. It's weird. Right. It is. I've actually never really thought about this because I often look back and have memories, right? But I've never really appreciated just how much of a cognitive dissonance it is that the person that I am right now feels like I can imagine all those things.
Right.
And yet, of course, my brain right now wouldn't have that challenge, but I feel the challenge of adding those numbers.
Right. I mean, it makes sense, right?
Right.
We project our current self into that memory because
Right.
it feels like it was us, but
Right.
but it was only part of us, so to speak.
Yeah.
Anyway, now in this second stage, there are two substages. I won't go into too much detail because I want to kind of race through this, but basically, there's some nuance here. Like, for example, the ability to discriminate. So when you put 5 coins in one row and 5 coins in another row, and you put them in the exact same configuration, kids will say there's the same amount in both rows. And then you stretch one row out, and kids at this stage will be like, well, the longer row has more coins.
Yeah.
And it's this mistake. But actually, there's a famous Piaget study that found that kids between 2.5 and 3 years old could actually discriminate between the two different rows because they hadn't developed the heuristic of length equaling more amount yet. So there's
I see. So one thing was not getting in the way of the other.
Right. and then between 3 and 4.5, kids had developed this shortcut of saying, well, if something is wider or bigger or taller, it has more things of it in it. And then they started screwing up that experiment. And then by the time they're 4.5, they learn an additional, logic or knowing of the world, which is that just because something is longer or taller doesn't necessarily mean there's more things in it.
I actually saw a video on YouTube of an experiment being done. I don't know how old the little kid was, but it was this Piaget. It was the coin experiment. One thing I noticed that was interesting, going back to the whole semantics of it all, is so the kid was asked which one has more coins, and at first he said this one because that one was the after she had stretched it, but then when she asked the kid to count it, he goes, count the bottom one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, count the other one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So then she said, which one has more coins? And he said something, and I'm paraphrasing, something like, well, it's the same number of coins, but that one is bigger.
Right.
And then I think she asked again, so which one has more coins? And then he sort of went back to the bigger one,
right?
Even though he had counted the coins,
right? Because is he semantically meaning there's more, or is he does he think you're actually asking which one is longer? Right. Anyway. So go ahead.
I was just saying, and if we treat it as a black box, it's sort of the effect is the same. You still don't have the ability to answer the question correctly to the standard that an adult can.
Right.
But under the hood, what's actually happening, maybe one or the other, or many, many different things, right?
Right.
Like they might in fact push, if really pressed from different angles, they might say, yes, there are 5 in each, but that one has more. And to us, that makes no sense.
Right.
But in their little head, it might make sense from a different way.
Right.
Just like you were just saying that the even younger ones say, well, yeah, they both have the same coins, because they don't know. Like it's really weird, right? They don't know about the length thing.
Right.
It's really fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating.
Yeah.
These different abilities that are so obvious to us as adults that they are actually learning in the same way that object permanence, we know that's a phenomenon that children develop, and it's so concrete. But then there's these other things that we learn about numerics and about quantity that other animals don't have. You know what I mean? Animals don't have, or most animals don't have the ability to count, or even if they do, they can't count very high. And so it's just interesting, like, to see these commonalities. Anyway, let's take a break. We get back. Let's continue with this phase. What do you say, Berto?
Yep.
All right, we're back from the break. We're still in stage 2 here of pre-operational stage, but we're in the second substage called the intuitive thought substage. This is from 4 to 7 years old, and this is when children want a lot of knowledge. In addition to being egocentric and illogical and stuff, they also want a lot of knowledge, and this is when they start asking... This is when they start asking why and how come.
Yes.
And when I think about my own life... I definitely remember asking a lot of questions as a kid. I became known as sort of the logical kid, which is funny considering that I shouldn't have had logic at that age. But I was frequently trying to make sense of the world, and in terms of physics and science. And like I remember we would go to the Space Needle, and one of the things that they would say is don't drop anything off the Space Needle, because even something as small as a penny
will kill someone because of gravity.
Right. If because it builds up so much speed, it can actually go through someone's skull.
I remember that.
And so and I remember asking someone, I was like, well, what if you dropped a quarter? Would it do more damage or less damage?
Right.
And no one knew the answer to that, because it's actually kind of a complicated question regarding momentum and
terminal velocity.
Right, and drag. A quarter has more drag, but it has more momentum, and how much more momentum.
Which metal is more malleable.
Right, all those kinds of things. But I tried to kind of logic it out. I was like, well, it would probably have the same, like almost identical damage, but since the quarter is just slightly heavier at the last little bit of impact, or the penny would slow down in the through the brain at some point, and the quarter would go like
a little further, like
a half a millimeter further, because it's just a slightly little bit heavier. And my family, I just remember they all looked at me with like this astonishment, like this tiny, I was probably like 4 or 5 years old, and everyone's just like, what? What?
Einstein.
Yeah.
Hercules.
Yeah. And another kind of example I can think of early in life was in kindergarten. I was fascinated with astronomy, and I would actually go to the astronomy section in our library and like read the books. And there was this one book I totally remember, and ended up buying later on, and I didn't understand most of it, but I just wanted to like know, stars and planets and telescopes and stuff like that. Also, kids during this time, their drawings are very symbolic. The way that they draw, they'll draw Dada, or they'll draw the dog, or they'll draw themselves. And what they focus on are the salient elements of the object, not the object itself.
Yeah, so it's the metaphor in their head about what that object is,
and or what they pay attention to mostly.
Sure. Yeah.
So what apparently kids pay most attention to is your face and your arms, right? Because your face has all this communication and everything, it's like they're really focused on your face. And then your arms, because your arms do things. Your arms give them things, or your arms pick them up or something. Your torso does nothing.
It's a line.
Yeah, your torso gives nothing for them, because your torso doesn't get, there's no, at the age of 7, and then your legs maybe. So what you'll see kids do, there's this universal way that kids will draw humans, which is the face and the torso is one thing. And then it's actually, they just draw a head with legs and arms.
Yeah.
But no body.
Right.
And so that's just but then later on, kids will actually draw,
right.
They'll try to actually represent the actual object itself. And so they'll draw a torso.
And then I saw a video of a child drawing, maybe it was 3 or 4 or something, trying to draw a triangle. And he had a triangle in front. It wasn't set. They didn't say draw a triangle. They showed him a triangle and say, can you draw this shape or this triangle? And he basically drew sort of a square with rounded corners, and then drew extra points, but the points were like little lines at the edges, because he said there's points there. There's pointy parts. So it was sort of like a rounded square with pointy parts. That was the triangle.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Right. And when you look at that, you're just thinking, and then in the future, he'll absolutely be able to draw a triangle. So what is it about cognitive development, these little tiny lessons that we learn about how to understand? If an adult did that, you would say like, oh, he had a stroke, or he has some developmental disability, right. Or, what is it about our development that, all the tiny little lessons you learn about like how to understand a shape.
Yeah.
Okay. And because in our adult minds, without understanding this stuff, we're like, well, you just draw the shape. It's not that hard. But that denies the reality of development in terms of like, and again, I'm not an expert, so this is me just taking some guesses around like when we're young, we just see that we don't necessarily see that it has three sides because we haven't had the ability to count quickly or to classify things in that way. What we see is a shape.
It is a closed.
It's a closed shape.
Yeah,
and it has three pointy parts.
It's got pointy parts. Yeah.
So if you describe that to someone, draw a shape with three pointy parts, you'd get a lot of different kind of shapes, right? But if you said draw three identically long lines that are touching, at each other's ends, and they're an angle of 35 degrees or whatever, then there's a certain each one of those things you have to understand. You have to understand straightness, you have to understand sides, you have to understand numbers, you have to understand angles, you have to understand like orientation to like up and down, and like there's all these different things that eventually converge on you being able to represent that image in your own drawing.
That's right. And what's underappreciated, because as adult humans, we take for granted all these capabilities we have, right? But if you think, okay, so animals that don't have human capabilities are certainly capable of very complex motions and behaviors, but they're not consciously aware. They certainly couldn't draw those out. Like if you asked a cheetah, hey, can you draw out the chase pattern you just followed? Because it looks pretty complex. They can't, of course, right? But this little kid already has the ability to recognize and then recreate that it is a closed object.
Yeah.
And it's got features.
Right.
That's pretty advanced.
Super advanced.
Right. Now, the other thing is even adults that are not trained in art or are not good innate drawers, which is most people really, if you tell them, even if you showed them, but let alone if you tell them, draw a cat, it's not going to look great, because what they're going to do is they're going to try to draw what in their head is cat. And so they'll be like, I don't know, it's got ears and the thing. But if you instead tell them, hey, look at this picture. Now, I don't want you to think of drawing a cat. I want you to just copy lines, curves, points, and try to replicate those aspects. They will, by and large, not everyone, but by and large, draw a better cat. Unless they're a really trained artist, in which they kind of go through that process already innately, by all their practice. But the point is that the average human is trying to not draw what they're seeing, but they're trying to draw their metaphor of a cat in their head, which doesn't actually come out looking very cat-like.
Right.
But if they're just trying to do a more mechanistic copying behavior, then it comes out looking more like the thing they're copying.
Right. So that kind of alludes to the critique we were talking about earlier, in terms of you take that same kid that you saw in that video and you teach him for a couple hours on how to represent a triangle, and he'll be able to do it, and then that'll generalize to being able to duplicate other kinds of shapes. So is it of his time or of his circumstances in terms of what he's been trained to do?
And clearly, if there's a 3-year swing based on whether you've had education and you live in a urban area, or you've had very little education and you live in a mountain area, then obviously there's a lot more to it than just the number of years.
Right. Yeah. But it is an ability that you will just innately get even without education.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, yeah, you a completely uneducated dude can draw a triangle. There's something about normal development. Anyway.
By the way, I wonder one thing about. I was thinking about how much TV, and I'm not even talking video games or literally just television. When you're a child and you don't have television, the only examples of human behavior and correlations and things are what's around you and what you see the adults doing. So in terms of number of scenarios and variables, it's that set. But when you're watching television, there's an explosion where now you see adults and children and metaphor representations of both and or animals in all sorts of contexts and cases and behaviors and things.
Particularly today with all the children's TV.
Right. So like instead of the child by the age of 10 having only seen pretty much adults work in the barn during the day and I get fed at this time and this is what happens. They've seen people in space, historical accounts, talking animals, any number of things.
Right.
So that's got to have had an effect on cognitive development,
Yeah.
speed, and all these things.
Yeah, I think studies have shown that, and when you throw in iPads and stuff, like
Right.
you get additional sort of acceleration of understanding of things. Now, you could argue that the kids who grew up on the farm are like really fucking good at farming when they're older, you know,
10,000 hours.
as opposed to being really good on their phone. The third Piaget phase is the concrete operational phase. This is from 7 to 11. This is when you can start to actually think logically, but not as well as you can later on. For example, children 7 to 11 can now accurately answer the liquid and quarters test.
Right.
So they have the ability to understand, oh, well, just because you extended them out doesn't mean there's more in this row. There's still only 5. Also, another experiment that you can run kids through is you say, if a feather can break a bottle, a feather can break a bottle, if Johnny hits a bottle with a feather, what happens? Younger kids will say, well, it doesn't break the bottle because feathers can't break bottles. But older kids will say, oh, well, I get it. You're saying that you started with the premise that feathers can break bottles. So if
using your premise, I will.
Using a logical, A and then B.
Yeah.
The feather breaks the bottle. That's what, according to your world, that's what happens.
So in other words, the younger child is not able to create a little play world to then apply logic within.
Exactly.
I see.
It's like they're two separate. They're not logically connected.
Right.
That's what logic is. It's like connected,
Right.
connected things.
That statement you made, great. That was cute and funny. This other statement.
Moving on. Yeah. For example, when I try to, I remember much more about my life 7 to 11.
Yeah.
And the only thing I can really think of that has to do with this is I played a lot of board games, and I also started playing Dungeons and Dragons around this time. And there's a lot of fucking rules to Dungeons and Dragons.
Wow, that's young that's a lot to digest at that age.
And also we played Risk. And I remember there's a fair amount of rules to Risk too.
Sure.
And I played neither one of those games accurately. We basically, me and my friends just completely made up our own 11-year-old version of those things because I tried to understand Risk. I tried to understand Dungeons and Dragons.
You're like, screw it. Let's just do this.
But I couldn't get it. I would read the instructions. I was just like, I do not understand what they're trying to tell me here, Now, you could say it's just like an unfamiliarity with language and technical writing or something. But anyway.
I remember I have a recording when I was 5. I was younger than that. No, of course, duh. I was like 3. I was 3, and I was in the car with my dad, and he used to record me a lot probably because he was a child psychiatrist, right? But he would record me a lot, so I actually have.
Do you
conversations.
still have these?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. Unfortunately I don't have as many as he made.
Yeah.
Because he lost them or something, or maybe he still has many of them. But I have several. Yeah, quite a few. And it's really interesting.
Have you digitized them?
I have started to, yeah. I've done several tapes already, saved them as digital. So we're sitting there in the car, and I'm talking about, he's like, well, okay, when we get home, you got to drink your milk or whatever, right? And I'm like, I don't want to drink my milk. No, I don't want to drink my milk. And then my dad goes, oh, okay, well, that's fine. That's too bad, though, because I know you love Indians, right? Native Americans. I know you love Indians, and
they drink their milk.
Exactly. He's like, and Indians are very strong and very smart, and it's funny because they actually love milk, but it's okay. You don't have to drink milk. And then a little silence goes by. We're driving, and then as if it's my idea, I go, Daddy, when I get home, I want to drink milk so I can be strong like Indians, right? And I present it as. This has no bearing on, I don't know what you were talking about, Dad. But anyways, brand new statement.
Yeah, so actually that's a really good, because parents do that all the time with their kids. And eventually it doesn't work, right? But when kids are young, you can say something like, would you rather pick up the toys in this way, or would you rather pick up the toys in this other way?
Right. And so you think you have a choice.
And the kids, and it's tricking a kid into being like, oh, I get to choose. Well, I want to do it this way. And you're like, good choice.
Good choice.
Let's do it that. And the kid's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, the mistake is
whereas if you just ask a kid, pick up the toys.
Do you want to pick up your
they'll be like, no. And so parents use this cognitive inability all the time to trick their kids.
Right. I remember doing this when I got a little older, and my cousin was visiting. She was little. She was probably 3, actually, 3 or 4, and I was a few years older. I was old enough that I was able to start applying this trick to get her to eat her veggies or whatever it was. So I remember basically copying my dad, being like, well, such and such, or your dolly. I don't remember what I used, but it worked. And I was like so proud of myself. I'm like, I got my little cousin to eat her veggies.
So again, in this 7 to 11 concrete operational stage, kids begin to have some logic, but they're not as good as later on. They're no longer egocentric, actually. This is a massive change from previous stages in that they can now see things from other people's point of view. When the person leaves the room and you put the ball in the other thing and the person comes back in, you say, where is it? Where do they think it is? They're going to be like, oh, well, they think it's in the other thing because they didn't see us move it. That's a pretty big ability that really translates into a lot of things. Empathy,
right? The
ability to really understand someone else's mind, to try to help them, to care about their experience, to not be so egocentric, They also improve their skills of classification in terms of, take these 10 random objects and classify them, put them into different groups, and so people take all the square things and put it in a group and all the round things, whereas younger kids can't do that very well.
Right. Oh, by the way, it's interesting how you could keep going with these stages, especially if you refine them, because certainly not all adults are at the same stage, right? And not all, you definitely even keep going through different stages as an adult. But then when you start considering what computers can do in different ranges, it's also interesting. So for example, take the idea of if you were going to program rules into a computer to tell it how to recognize a cat, as humans, our abilities stop there. We actually can't. We're not smart enough to know what are all those rules that we should use to say what makes a cat, right? So a biologist certainly could say, well, cats have this kind of DNA thing. But meaning I'm going to show you a picture of a cat. A human would say things like, oh, well, it should have whiskers. They well, what are whiskers? Oh, well, I don't know, sort of curvy lines and then quickly the average adult is done. Like you can't progress further. You're like,
well, I think you're mistaking rote knowledge of scientific classifications that other scientists has made and like the innate ability to classify things.
No. What I'm saying is that, that a cat is a cat when you see it, right? So your brain learned how to classify cat, right? But our human abilities...
If you grew up seeing cats.
If you grew up seeing but our human abilities do not extend into being able to explain why you're classifying a cat like that. No, we could do it at a gross level. We could say, well, I mean, it's got whiskers and it's got the nose and it's bipedal quadrupedal and it's got we can do all those things. But as soon as if you were trying to turn that into a heuristic that a computer could follow, it would classify all sorts of things incorrectly.
No. But computers, that's one thing they've learned, right? Is like trying to teach a computer through human classification how to categorize things is like, because
we don't actually know how to do it.
Well, we do. We just do it in a way that we can't verbalize.
Right. Sorry. Our brain clearly mastered the pattern, but our verbal has no, and our logic part of our brain is not aware of how that works.
Most humans who have seen dogs and cats can 99.99999% of the time classify a dog versus a cat. you try to strong arm a computer to understand the difference between a dog and a cat, and it will not be able to do it. But you give it its own ability
to train itself
to learn,
in a very similar way.
Then it will.
And even some of the smartest amongst us, like I don't know which justice it was. I don't know how smart they are, but clearly justices of the Supreme Court are smart individuals in many ways. The famous statement about pornography.
Right.
I can't tell you what it is, but I know it when I see it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it sounds ridiculous. And when it's used in this sort of funny way, it is ridiculous. But a lot of things in law are that. It's just, and we don't like that because we'd like things to be concrete. But a lot of things are actually with that understanding of just like, well, the way that the courts are ruling today is we're saying this, anyway. Yeah. Also, people at this stage from 7 to 11, they no longer think inanimate objects have human minds. So you could take a doll, maybe not their doll, but a doll, and you could say, what if I threw this in the fire? Would that be a bad thing? And they'd be like, well, no. I mean, it's an inanimate object. Whereas kids younger than that will be like terrified.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Okay, the last stage, formal operation stage, age 11 to 16. This is when children develop abstract thought. This is when we develop our adult understandings of things. Yeah. We can handle tasks with several steps, like going to graduate school or a month-long project that we do in high school. We can think and plan for the future. Children who are younger than 11 have a really hard time with that.
Right.
We're much better with logic. We can basically develop hypotheses. We understand logical sequences. Yep. We know how to experiment. Like you take a 15-year-old and their phone isn't turning on, and you just ask them like, why do you think your phone isn't turning on? And they'll just say something, well, maybe it doesn't have any battery power, like I didn't charge it. And you're like, how do you know? How would you be able to figure that out? They're like, well, if I plug it in and it starts to charge, then I'll know that it'll say like 0 battery. And so that's all logical understanding. That's deep, super complicated, like basically the foundation of our scientific process right there. It's just like the ability to develop an hypothesis, to observe, and through past experience, and even like if a new situation completely you've never seen before, like say there's a new object, like some kind of car that a kid has never seen before, and you're just like, it doesn't turn on. Why do you think it doesn't turn on? They'll be like, well, based on other objects that use electricity, I'm guessing it maybe the battery's dead. Right. How would you find out? Well, maybe you'd plug it in and see if the dash comes. Like the ability to translate into all these other areas is just like this super complicated brain power that younger kids do not have.
Right.
You give the kid the phone and you say like, what's wrong? They're just like, I don't know. Mom usually fixed that for me or something. Or they'll have one answer to that. They'll be like, well, it's broken. Well, like, what do you think? Like they might say like, well, it needs to be charged. And then you say, well, what if you plug it in and it doesn't work? They'll be like, I don't know, instead of like, well, maybe it's dead. Maybe it's not a real phone. Maybe, like older kids will be able to like, they have the ability to really extend into the abstract world. Like, well, let me take some guesses here. You know what I mean? So the example from my life that I can think about that I'm wondering what you think about this, because it sounds like you might have had a similar childhood, was that in my early childhood, computers were just starting to become common enough that I had access to them, like Commodore 64, this kind of thing.
Oh. Did you have a Commodore 64?
No, but Chris Glover did. Oh. And when I went over to his house for like sleepovers, like I would just dominate his Commodore 64.
I had Commodore 64 Envy because my cousin had one.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so cool.
And I just remember you could actually save programs on a cassette tape.
Yep.
That would never actually work to get it back onto the Commodore 64. It would spend like 20 minutes recording my programs, and then the next day I'd go back and it'd be gone, Anyway. But I remember when I was thinking about this episode, I was thinking, well, I mean, I guess it's possible I could draw this conclusion, is that when I was in the 5th and 6th grade, I was programming in BASIC.
Right.
And my programs were, for lack of a better pun, very basic.
Yeah.
Like my aspirations and my understanding of what was possible in programming was totally linear. It was just...
I like, by the way, how you've resigned yourself to we're going to use a pun. It's just that I didn't have a better pun.
And so my programs were 10, blah, blah, blah.
CLS.
20,
Print hello world.
Print, fuck off teacher. 30, go
to 20.
Go to 20, or it was just very rudimentary. But by the time I was in 8th grade and 9th grade, I was starting to program in Pascal, which of course I don't think people use anymore. But it's like early C plus language, right? It's like it's the ability to create subscripts and different programs within programs, and an easy way to kind of organize all that in a visual format that it doesn't completely like.
Yeah, in BASIC it was very linear, and to do you could.
You could do modules in the program, but it was the visual way it looked. You couldn't differentiate.
Like go to 1,000.
Yeah,
and then
you'd have to scroll down to 1,000.
Exactly.
And so with Pascal, you could actually create these little
functions.
sub things, and my ability to get that was only there because my brain had developed more.
Yeah.
Whereas when I was in the 5th and 6th grade, I'm guessing I did. I mean, it's hard for me to know because I wasn't exposed to it, but I'm guessing I wouldn't have understood it.
Right.
I remember learning early if-then statements like in 6th and 7th grade and kind of getting it and going like, oh, that's interesting. But by the time I was doing Pascal in 9th grade, like I fully got it. I was like, oh, I get it. This is how you actually create you can do anything in this.
Right.
The possibilities are endless. If you do it big enough and you spend enough time, like you could do anything in this sort of format.
Right.
And so, do you have any thoughts? Because you sounds like you were programming at that.
Oh
age.
yeah, I mean, let's see. What my grandpa got a Radio Shack calculator that was the kind where you could write basic programs. It was wide. It was a wide calculator with a little wide display. It was a Radio Shack. I forget the model, but it was so beautiful. By the way, it was like shiny metallic, and then the buttons had colors, and oh my god! So when he got it, I was like, oh my god! And I got so lucky because my grandpa was like, I don't know what to do with this, right? So he like gave it to my dad, and my dad was like, I don't know what to do with this. So here, you might want this, right?
How old were you?
But I mean, it was still my grandfather's, but I got to use it. That's what I'm trying to remember. I think I must have been 10.
Okay. It sounds about right.
Yeah. And it came with a little manual, and it was how to write basic programs. Oh my God, I got obsessed. And so imagine you're writing the 10, all those things, but you have one line of display at a time.
Yeah.
So that was but it was a great tool. I had to learn how to keep things in my mind and then keep the logic in my head and all these things.
Yeah. That's my very first word processor. I had a typewriter that could actually remember a whole document, but it had
one line.
Yeah.
I remember those. So that was my first exposure, and then I got my aunt brought down with her a Tandy color computer, and that's when I was like, I think I was 11.
Tandy, what? Do you remember what model?
Oh no! I got the calculator when I was 9 because she brought the thing down when I was 10.
Do you remember the Tandy model?
Yeah, it was a color computer.
Oh, it was color, so it was...
Color Computer 1.
Oh, okay.
And it was sold by Radio Shack.
Because in 7th and 8th grade in our junior high, we had what we called Trash 80s, which were TS 80s.
That's the Trash 80s, like the precursor to the Color Computer.
Right, yeah.
And then the Color Computer had Color Computer 1, 2, and 3. I had the 1, and then later my mom bought me 3.
Yeah.
Color Computer 3 was near the power of Commodore 64.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but the Commodore 64 still had a way better sound system.
Oh.
Because
it played video games.
Well, mine did too, but the difference is the audio system in the color computers could only do one sound at a time.
Oh.
The Commodore 64 had a multi-channel sound system.
Oh.
It had a multi-channel sound processor, so it was awesome.
So do you remember cognitive abilities correlating with age for you along those lines?
Definitely, because as an example, I I had struggled so much with these sort of like mathematical operational things. And I remember right around 6th grade is when I started realizing that I liked understanding the whys of math. And I started getting into like, oh, why does this work? What is that? And I started reading like proofs, like how do you prove theorems and things like that. And so I remember right around that age, I started sort of like getting that, like, oh, okay, there's reasons for it. That's what it was. It was, there are reasons for things. It's like before that, I feel like it was more of
arbitrary rules. That,
like
that adults,
I'm in a class, I have to memorize something.
Yeah.
And then right around that age, I started realizing, oh, there's underlying reasons. I don't know what language I would have, I certainly wouldn't have been aware that I was aware of that. But when I'm looking back thinking, that's what got interesting for me all of a sudden was that this fascination of like, why is this and what does that lead to? And yeah, it was right around 6th grade, 7th grade. And
so another piece from my childhood that I think exhibits this final stage for me was of the formal operational stage where you can plan for the future and understand several steps in a task was when I loved playing Dungeons and Dragons and games like it. And there's this game called James Bond role playing game.
Oh,
yeah, and it basically tries to recreate the whole James Bond world.
Oh my god!
And so
that sounds fun now.
Yeah, it's like D&D for James Bond, and James Bond totally lends itself to D&D because there's like these fantastical feats that you have.
Sure.
Like you jump off a thing and you just
roll.
You just man it. But they had these things called like, I can't remember the points, but there are like James Bond points where if you misrolled something or you just wanted to do something totally awesome, you could spend
of course
one of these points and just
only
be like,
James Bond could do that.
Right. I want to be able to like throw this bomb and I want it to like manage to blow up all 5 boats at once, And it was up to the game master to be like, yeah okay, that'll work. But you'd only get like 1 or 2 of those at a time.
They're like ninjas in samurai swords. So,
but anyway, so the evidence that I have around my ability to understand several steps was that I would have friends come over, and I would have the VHS of a James Bond movie, and so I would have this whole intro of just like, okay, so make your character, blah, blah. And then I'd be like, okay, so this is what starts. And then, M tells you to go to this thing. And then you go to this thing and what do you do? And they're like, okay, well, we go into this room. And I'd be like, okay, so let's go upstairs to the living room. We're going to pop in the James Bond movie and we're going to watch the scene. And so we'd watch actually this is what happens to you.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then a fight would start and then I'd pause it and then we'd go back downstairs and be like, okay, let's work out the fight,
That's
and
funny.
like I would have to plan. This is me at 12 years old.
Yeah, and you'd have to plan a lot for that.
Planning a whole event that coordinates with an actual movie of James Bond. And I would have to route them in that direction because if they're like, we're going to go in this other direction, I'd have to somehow get them back because it's an open world. They can do whatever they want.
Right.
And it involved knowing kind of about how MI6 operates and like CIA and like, Spectre and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, like that I'm sure I wasn't able to do when I was 10.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
For me, one of the memories, it was around Legos because what would happen is I would plan what it was like a Saturday, right? And usually what would happen is a break would hit, like Holy Week was a week-long break, right? And I would get these ideas in my head of like, okay, I am going to make an exhibit this week for my Legos. And so I'm going to build, and I had in my mind several different pieces of Lego or several installations. And so I would start planning, okay. And I knew roughly how many pieces, not the number, but like sort of the
volume
and quality. I almost had memorized how many of each kind I had. I had this drawer full, and it was a pretty big drawer. And so I'm like, all right, I think I can make one of these, and I can probably make one of those. Might start running out of pieces for this one.
Did you have a mixture of space and regular?
Yes, space was one of the big quantities, but I had a few other things.
I had way more regular.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just the generic colored bricks.
I don't know why, but well, I remember getting more of the space ones. So I did that, and I remember, and I would plan them, and then they would sort of come to fruition the way I sort of had imagined them, and I would make, and then I'd have my poor dad and grandma had to sit there and listen to all my explanations as I guided them through the museum tour of all my things. And that was around 10 years old, 10, 11, where probably 10 years old, because by 11 and 12, I was doing a lot less Legos and a lot more
it's Lego,
computer stuff.
We don't say Legos.
Oh, I'm sorry. Lego. I was doing a lot more Lego. I've always said Legos.
I know it doesn't sound bizarre, right, but
anyways, that required some planning that I remember as a younger child I probably couldn't have pulled off or even thought to do.
Do you have anything that reminds you of playing with Lego or Legos?
Oh yeah, totally. So first. Do you mean like fond memories I have, or things that trigger memories?
Trigger.
Oh yeah. So there's certain TV shows that I associate with building
like
Legos.
Like what? Like Colombian TV shows?
No. 80s TV shows specifically. So
A-Team?
V the Final Battle specifically. V the Final Battle, because I remember that was sort of a long series, right?
Yeah.
And I remember, and actually each episode was like an hour long, which was unusual because a lot of those shows were half hour long.
Yeah.
So I remember sitting there on Saturday building my Legos while V the Final Battle was on.
Yeah, for me, it's Boston, the first album, More Than a Feeling. Because my brother would listen to vinyl.
I see.
And for some reason, he must have been really into that album while I was really into making Legos, because I just remember him blasting that in the basement and then me being in the room. And so whenever I hear, like last night, I heard a Boston song and instantly it reminded me of playing with Legos.
Nice.
Another sort of the final example I give about this ability to make huge plans and to just have lots of steps was when my dad got a video camera and I started making movies.
Right.
Like right away, I started experimenting with movies, and pretty quickly, and I hadn't thought about it till, prepping for this, that what I was able to do was something that is evidence of this new cognitive skill, because we didn't have an editing machine. We didn't have computers.
Right.
And so we just had a VCR basically with a camera attached to it, and you would press record and then you'd press pause. And so, and whenever you pressed pause, so you pressed go and you press stop. When you do that on your phone, it starts.
It's instant.
Yeah, it's instant. But back then, when you pressed go, it would take a second for the VCR to kind of kick in.
Right.
And then when you press stop, it would take a second for it to stop, and for some reason it would rewind the tape slightly.
Right.
So if you needed an exact cut, you needed to actually time the off button right at the right time. And so I wanted to make movies.
Right.
And so we would do parodies on like Rambo or Raiders of the Lost Ark or something. But we would involve like Mr. Potato Head and stuff,
Right.
And I would sort of write a script in my head, and then I would have to get costumes and like get actors. My friends were always my actors, and then I would have to actually film the scenes in order. And I couldn't go back, right? And so it was so many steps. Now these were not very good movies; they were not very good productions because I had no idea.
Right, but you had to sequence out a ton of stuff,
and you couldn't watch it until you were all done. And sometimes it would take us all day long from 10 in the morning until 8 at night. And some of them are funny because you can tell the sun was going down because like suddenly the scene's like really dark, and that's just another piece of evidence that I know I couldn't have done if I was 8 years old. In fact, my little brother, who is 7 years younger than me, would often try to do very similar things that I was doing. Right. And he was, when I think about the things he was doing when we first got the video camera, was evidence that he couldn't really conceive of the larger picture the way that I could at the age of like 15 or something. But anyway, So just to wrap up some of the critiques here, again, he kind of proposed discrete stages at times. He sort of got a little bit more nuanced it later on in his career, so that's one kind of critique. Culture and training obviously play a role, and the thing that I'll say is that contemporary people or neo-Piagetians actually totally understand these critiques,
Sure,
and will incorporate. So, the same way that I'm a Freudian, I absolutely understand that a lot of the things Freud said does not make sense. That doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
Any final things about Piaget, Berto?
I have rediscovered, I actually have to thank you, because through this process, I have done more research for this episode than I usually do for any episode.
Well, because I asked you, because I was like, I kind of need you to look into it, because if you want to talk about it.
I wanted to say two things. One of them is that in general, I would like to do more like this, where you give me a topic and I don't become an expert, of course, but I go do some research, and so I have more to say about it, right? So it's kind of fun. The second thing is...
So just to chime in on that, I used to think in the beginning of this podcast that that's how this would go down.
Right.
That you and I would do an equal amount of prep.
Sure.
And I would try to get you to do prep in the beginning, and you would not do prep or not enough prep.
Right. No, and sometimes not any.
And it has to do with that thing in terms of like the long-term planning.
Definitely that, but it also had to do with my conception of the podcast was very different.
Like, you thought it would be more chatty.
But I was like, I don't know, I'm just here. We're doing this for fun, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Whereas,
which is great. I think it's a great combo, you and me, in that way.
Whereas now I'm thinking like,
now you want to break that good combo.
No, I just want to.
So I'll just show up and I'll just start chatting.
I want to give you the ability to task me a little more with. Like, this was an example of like, I mean, I didn't do 40 hours of research, but I did research. I watched quite a bit of it, and it was fun. But the other thing is that I actually have a renewed interest in child developmental study. Not to like go into a brand new career, because frankly, I love French love studies, or whatever, romantic French stuff. But what I'm saying is that I actually, as a result of this, I now started kind of binge watching interesting things about child development and all these things, and so I'm happy this happened, because I'm like excited about it.
Well, so in the future, because normally I will reserve topics for you that allow your chatty, non-prepared self to be involved in.
We should definitely still have that.
But I'll ask you if I'm prepping for something else, if you want to actually do. Okay.
Some of them work better if I actually haven't prepped at all, because then you get, like, there's been many of that part of the point is to get my sort of like off the cuff surprise reactions to things. So I'm thinking more like specific topics that are sort of interesting to me, or that I could maybe contribute a little bit more if I do some research, right?
Yeah. So anyways. So that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining us out there, and please take care of yourself, because
you deserve it.